Hello and welcome to this week's Midweek meditation. So the roadmap has been published and people are flocking to book holidays and weddings and so on for later in the year. Hopes are rising that by midsummer life will have returned to some sort of normality. But without wanting to put too much of a damper on things, there is still a lot of uncertainty, isn't there? The dates we've been given for the reopening of different parts of society are the earliest at which it will happen. The warning is still there. We need to continue to be careful because coronavirus hasn't gone away. Life continues to be surrounded by dangers. And of course it's not just coronavirus. Life is a hazardous business. And the Christian life can be hazardous as well. We're just as vulnerable to viruses as anyone. We aren't immune to the dangers of life. But on top of that, there are hazards of discipleship. The Apostle Paul wrote to Timothy that everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. We're returning to our journey through the Psalms of Ascent, those songs sung by pilgrims on their way up to Jerusalem. It is a picture for us of our pilgrimage as disciples. And it is a journey which, as well as joy, faces us with dangers. Psalm 124 is very realistic about that, but also about the fact that God is greater than those dangers. So let me read Psalm 124. If the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side when people attacked us, they would have swallowed us alive when their anger flared against us. The flood would have engulfed us, the torrent would have swept over us, the raging waters would have swept us away. Praise be to the Lord, who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. It's a graphic description, isn't it? They would have swallowed us alive, the flood would have engulfed us, the torrent would have swept over us. Is life for God's people really like that? Well, certainly for Christians in some parts of the world, it is a good description. Most weeks we can read reports of Christians who've been attacked, imprisoned, sometimes even killed for their faith. Yes, the life of discipleship can be one of great suffering. In this country we're blessed not to face persecution of that intensity. But increasingly, standing up for the gospel can bring opposition. It could cost you your job. It might well lose you your popularity. And for God's people in the Old Testament, there were similar challenges. This is one of the few of these Psalms, where we're told who the author is. It's David. And the psalm does sum up David's experience at times. Even though David had been chosen by God, his life was still full of danger. One time, he took his men to save the town of Keilah, which was being attacked by the Philistines. He drove the Philistines off, but Saul heard that he was there and set out to capture him. Suddenly David was a prisoner inside the town he had rescued. Soon afterwards, David was out in the wilderness, and again Saul got word of it and set out with his army. At one point, Saul and his men were on one side of the mountain, and David was on the other, frantically trying to get away. So I guess that David's words here do sum up how he felt. Saul's army pressing in on him, it felt as though at any moment this enemy was going to swallow him whole. It felt as though a flood was going to sweep him away. But why should this psalm, then, be included in this set of pilgrims' songs, the Psalms of Ascent, which was probably put together much later? Maybe it's because pilgrims of all times and places need reminding that when trouble comes, It's not something new. It shouldn't be something unexpected. But also because past generations of God's people have found that even in those situations, they can trust God. Because this psalm isn't primarily about trouble or danger, it's about help. When faced with overwhelming trouble, humanly speaking, there can seem to be no hope. If the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side when people attacked us, they would have swallowed us alive. But the Lord was on their side. He was at work for them. So David could say, we have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken, and we have escaped. And for the pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem, knowing that that had been true for David would encourage them when their pilgrimage became tough, when they were under attack. And for us today, knowing how God has acted for his people in the past can encourage us when the road is hard. But what about those times when God's people don't escape? Those times when the Lord does allow them to be torn by their attackers' teeth? What about those times when persecution and danger and trouble do lead to death? In his poem, Safety, the First World War poet Rupert Brooke wrote, "Safe shall be my going, secretly armed against all death's endeavour. Safe though all safety's lost, safe where men fall. And if these poor limbs die, safest of all." As Paul wrote in Romans 8, in all things God works for the good of those who love him. That doesn't mean that he will never let bad things happen. It does mean that he will keep us to the end. The flood will not engulf us. The torrent will not sweep over us. The raging waters will not sweep us away. And so, like the psalm, we can say, praise be to the Lord, who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. A psalm that focuses on trouble might seem depressing, not the sort of thing that any pilgrim wants to hear. But a psalm that assures us that whatever happens, God is on our side. He is at work for our good. He will not fail us, and he will bring us safely to the end of our journey, because he's done it for countless of his people before. That is a psalm worth treasuring. Praise be to the Lord, because our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth.